Welcome everyone on this today's evening. And as you know, we are here to discuss about Mark's book, The Business Case for Love, and the six best-in-class company behaviors that he speaks about. So, just to help you understand, it all started a month back when I connected with Mark to interview him about his book. And during the course of this interview, I came to know about Mark's six best in class company behaviors that make a company stand out from the rest of the companies. These principles really intrigued me, and I began connecting the dots and associating my own personal brand experiences with the success and failure of companies. Interestingly, during this tenure, I came across the ideologies of all three of you, and we seem to share a similar feeling as Marx. And I started toying the idea of having this discussion to get you to share your own experiences about why some brands make it to the top while others stumble even after reaching the peak. So let me run through a quick introduction before we can kick off this discussion. Well, we have with us today Mark Cox. He's the author of the book The Business Case for Love and founder of the company Spirit, a London based consultancy firm that helps organizations build a strong culture. Then we have Harini Sreenivasan. She's affiliate partner at Semco Style Institute. During her 24-year career, Harini has successfully experimented in the areas of leveraging people potential for business excellence. She's truly a people's person. Welcome, Harini. Then we have Dr. Prashant Chauhan. He is the Director Operations Center of Foresight. Dr. Prashant's love to work with people he has mentored many of them and truly believes in empathetic leadership. His philosophy that people and processes can lead to profit helps him drive the best results from his team that always vouches for him. Last but not the least, we have Vishal Naithani. He is the founder of Resurgence Human Capital, a coaching firm that helps individuals realize their true potential through insightful coaching conversations. Vishal has been in HR leadership for various organizations, including Shuttle and OYO. He advocates customer experience being an offshoot of employee experience. So, warm welcome to all of you. And Mark, now let's hear from you about the six best-in-class company behaviors mentioned by you in your book.
Oh, well, thank you, Hector. It's a very good introduction to my work. I just thought I think the interesting thing, and thank you to everybody else that's involved in the discussion. I think the interesting thing for me was the sort of some of the commonality of thinking from the panel and my own. And I just thought I'd start off by talking about the word love before I talk about the best-in-class company behaviors, because when I started the company Spirit, it was about 12 years ago now, and as you said, I mean, my focus is company culture, but I part of my difference was I used the word love, and it was quite challenging because people were skeptical and saw it as a soft and fuzzy word. Whereas for me, what my core belief was that if you want and it remains the same, which is if you want your company to be loved by your customers, you need to start with your employees loving what they do. And for me, there was an absolute link between the creating a strong culture which people bought into and loved as an employee, which will then translate out to the customer experience. And for me, if you got that right, it was about building, it would help build a sustainable company. And one of the things in my work, and obviously I talk about this within the book, is when I work with my clients, the first question I ask them is talk about a customer experience or a company experience that they love. And it's always been interesting. I mean, it's become a technique, if you like, for me, because I found that if you work with companies and you start with getting them to talk about themselves, they really struggle. They really struggle to talk about their own company, or get very dogged and defensive. So my start point has always really been to help people to say, well, take your job hat off for a moment and put your customer hat on, and think about customer experiences that you love and why. And what's been interesting is that, and obviously I've done that with hundreds of people over the last 10 years or so, with a variety of different companies and a variety of different, in a variety of different countries. And what I found interesting is that when people talk about a customer experience they love and why, the variety of ideas can be from anything. It could be your favorite restaurant, or your favorite sports team, or a global brand, or an independent store you love, or your favorite app. But what I found interesting was when people talked about the why, there was a lot of common threads, and those common threads started to build into what I call the best-in-class company behaviors. So the 6 behaviors have really come out of the mouths of my clients, and what they've done, or what I've really done, is if you like, edit them into a format that actually allows people to think about their own businesses. And again, I think the interesting thing about when people talk about companies that they love is it's always a mixture of what I call heart and head. It's always a mixture of things like, people feel listened to, they feel looked after, the people that are talking to them, they've got clearly a love for what they do, they've got strong product knowledge, they feel that they're in the moment, as in you're not on script. So there's a real balance between the heart and the head. And so what I try and do in my work, and it'd be interesting to hear back from you and your colleagues on the discussion on this. But one of the things I try and do with my clients is to help them think about what I call best in class rather than best in category. And one of the experiences I found is almost every one of my clients, they constantly refer themselves or reference themselves against their immediate competition. And whereas as customers, we don't. As customers, we have this what I call a Rolodeck of thoughts and experiences in our head that we constantly judge things against. Now, for some, it's quite top of mind, and for others, it's quite recessive. But if we have an experience, or we have a customer experience, we will judge what we're feeling and getting from that from all our experiences. And naturally, as human beings, we tend to rank them in terms of, okay, what were the ones that really worked, and what were the ones that didn't work. It's interesting. A little anecdote from the last 24 hours. One of the things I've started to do over the last month or so is receive on a daily basis the Financial Times as a subscription, so it gets delivered to my house. And the last 2 days it hasn't arrived, and actually, so I went onto their chat room, and they were very quickly sorting something out for me, so they were responding really well, and I think really working hard to make sure that obviously there'd been a problem over the last 2 days, that they rectified it. And so for me, it's a little example of actually that's the fact that I felt I was being listened to and responded to. And I don't know, we may well have all done the various chat issues where you go on and go onto online chat, and sometimes I think it's not a human being, it's AI. And I think when that happens, or artificial intelligence, you're not getting that human interaction. So let me just talk. Shall I just talk through each of the 6, Hector, to begin with, and give a little bit of background on each of the 6? Yeah. So so the first one, I mean, though they don't come in an order, I always use this as the order. So i.e. they're all equally important. So the first one is image and experience match. And I think one of the things that, if I give a little background on that, my first career was in advertising back in the 1980s. And really, if you use the word image then, it tended to mean advertising. It tended to be a TV commercial or a poster, and you created your image through advertising. But there are 2 things that have, I think, changed dramatically over the last 20 or 25 years. It is that although companies still advertise, as customers, we are much more. We put the experience side of it, the actual physical experience of how we feel with what that company does, to a much higher level, and therefore the companies that do well, basically what they say and what they do are the same thing, and yet so many businesses don't do that. And I think this has been one of the massive failures of business behavior over the last 10 or so years. And, the world is littered with examples where a company effectively has lied. They say they're doing one thing, but they're actually doing something else. And I think one of the things that's really changed over the last 10 years is because of social media and because of the way a lot of the media operates, a company gets found out. Sometimes it might be a few years before they get found out. Sometimes it could be instantly. And a couple of examples I talk about in my book. You may remember 4 or 5 years ago, United Airlines, a passenger was pulled off that flight for overbooking, Dr. Deo, and at the same time they were, as an airline, saying we fly the friendly skies. So for me, that was a classic example of image and experience not matching. Their communication was saying one thing, but their behavior was saying something else. Probably the biggest example in Europe over the last few years was Volkswagen, where and it goes back to my advertising days. They were always a brand that was built about reliability and honesty and authenticity, and yet what they were doing was ultimately Dieselgate, which was lying about their emissions target, their emissions within the cars, and obviously they got found out in the US to begin with, in the US. And it's interesting for me, what drove that actually was the target of wanting to be the #1 car manufacturer in the world. And in order to do that, they had to break laws, and they got found out. And the reputation of VW may recover, but it will take a long time, and their sales have plummeted, and therefore for me there is a direct link between a company's reputation and this issue of whether it says and does the same thing. So the companies who do really well, the best-in-class companies, are really clear that what they do, what they say, and what they do must match. Last anecdote on this one. I mean, it's been interesting in the UK press over the last couple of days. There's been an example of a very big, successful online retailer, fashion retailer called Boohoo, and they've been exposed for bad working practices within factories within Leicester, and on their website, They talk about not having, their suppliers have signed up to not having slave or poor working conditions, and yet they have, and therefore they've been exposed in the media in a big way, and they're now very much on the back foot because they've been caught out. They've said one thing and they have done another. So image and experience match is the first one. The second one is what I call constantly inside the heads of the customer. And what I find with this is that businesses, when they grow, often get arrogant, and they stop listening. They think they know best, and often what happens with a business as it grows is it becomes very internally focused. It becomes, everybody gets involved with meetings and what we're doing, i.e. what the company is doing, and they stop understanding what's going on in the real world. And so constantly inside the heads of the customer is a mindset, which is really about the more you're out, the more you listen, the more curious you are, the more ideas you get, the more ideas that you the more insight you get from people that you can then translate into how do you do better as a business. Now, interestingly, the one example I quote that is actually happens in India in my book is about 3 years ago. There was a BBC program about IKEA, and it was called Flatback Empire. And one of the series of the programs was talking about this. I mean, obviously wasn't using my language, but it was the equivalent of this. And they tell the story of when they were launching IKEA in India. A lady from Sweden went out to live in India about 3 years before they launched. But what she then did was called home visits. And the whole idea was not to do a focus group, but actually was to go and sit in people's homes and to listen and understand how people experience how people lived. And she didn't do it once; they did it 800 times. And that to me is a perfect example of being inside the heads of the customer. Get out, listen, experience, and if you do that, you learn and you gain insights. And it's still fine. I still find it fascinating that companies, they don't do that, or they stop doing that when they grow. I think that's probably some companies, they stop doing that when they grow. So that's what being inside the heads of the customer is all about. It's a mindset. The next one is what I call brave yet disciplined, and in many ways this is the toughest of the six. My quick go-to example for this is Apple, when Apple did Apple stores. So the brave thing, I mean, obviously this is about 12, 15 years ago now, but the brave thing was to say, you know what, we're not happy with the way our products are distributed or looked after in other people's stores. We're going to do it ourselves. The discipline was saying, how do we do it in a way that is right for what Apple stands for? And for me, this is what I mean by brave yet disciplined. You have lots of companies who are full of ideas and who are brave and try and do things, but they don't have the discipline to say we need to make sure that what we do sits very comfortably with what our company stands for, what its sense of purpose is. You probably get more companies on the other side, which is actually they think they're very disciplined, they're very process led, but actually they very rarely do anything new. They haven't got the confidence to have new ideas. So that's what I mean by brave yet disciplined. I mean, I was lucky enough at the early parts of the company Spirit to work with McLaren Automotive. When McLaren, this was when they were building a car company, and I've lost. Is everybody still there? I've lost. Hector, you're back. And I was involved when they were launching a car company. So they were the racing company, the Formula One company, and the bravery was saying, actually, we want to now create a car company. But what they wanted, but the discipline was, we're going to do it in the McLaren way. So what they wanted to, where I was helping them, was to help them understand what their company spirit was, so they could then create it in a way that was not Ferrari or not Jaguar, but was right for McLaren. So, so that's what I mean by brave yet disciplined. The next one is what I call innovating constantly. And I think one of the things that, and perhaps this is, well, not perhaps, I think this is one of the issues that COVID has shown up, is that lots of businesses, when they get to a point when they're doing well, they stop, and they stand still, and they think, okay, we've cracked it now, and we'll just stay as we are because we're doing well. And the trouble is, the world doesn't stop. And I think what has been really shown up over the last 3 months is that the companies that have stayed, they haven't adapted, they haven't moved on over the last few years. And this is particularly true in the UK of a lot of our UK retailing. They haven't moved on. The experience of today is pretty much the experience of the last 10 years. So for me, the companies that are best in class, they have it in their DNA to constantly move on, constantly think through what is the experience that we have now and how do we keep it fresh. And for me, there's a very much a link between constantly inside the head to the customer and constantly innovating, because the more you listen, the more insights you get, and the more insights you get, the more ideas you have in order to keep your business, moving forward. And I mean, my big example to land this point is Google, because at one level, Google are doing all sorts of things with new businesses and new areas, but they always look after what I call is their core product, which is the homepage, the search, and therefore the Google Doodle, is very much part of that way of keeping the customer experience fresh. And I think one of the things I've also found is that innovation, or the word innovation, terrifies most business people, because they think of it just as it's got to be something, massive, a new product or a new thing. Whereas for me, it's just this mindset of how do you keep the experience fresh? And sometimes that is a new product, and sometimes that's a new service, but it's about using those insights you get in order to keep the customer experience fresh. So that's really what I mean by constantly innovating. So 2 more to go, and then we can open up the discussion, I hope. But the next one is this whole idea of the mindset of having a memorable customer experience. And I think, in many ways, there are 2 types of businesses. There are one type of business says, here's our product, how are we going to sell it? And there are other businesses which is actually start the other way around, and then say, what is the vision we are trying to create, and then work backwards into the product, back to the product. And actually, if I go back to Apple, I had an interesting example yesterday. So I had a real problem with my MacBook Pro, and I found locally to me a genius, an ex-Apple employee who not only has saved me a lot of money, but helped but he was really interested in what I was doing, and because he worked for Apple, he was telling me some stories about what he think was working well and what was going wrong. But we were talking about the Apple Store, and I know this anyway from other sources, but they started off with a vision of what is the customer experience we're trying to create. That's where they started when they were thinking about the Apple Store, and then related it back to, okay, who are the people we need to hire, what sort of size of business, what sort of size of store, how are we going to get people to be involved with the product. So they didn't start there. They started with, what is the experience we're trying to create? And I think that is it's a mindset. It's a mindset that probably I experienced firsthand when I flew to Sydney a couple of years ago, because my daughter was living out there at the time, and it was always been on my bucket list to fly Singapore Airlines, and what I found interesting about, so I flew with four flights, to Singapore, then on to Sydney, and then back again. And what was interesting was, so I was on an A380, but it was an old plane. So technically, the product wasn't as good as some of the other airlines. But what made it different was they'd actually, as part of their DNA, really focus on the customer experience. So their point of difference was all about how do we make sure that the cabin crew are engaging you in the best way possible during your flight. And when I came back and looked into their company philosophy, that's very much what they talk about, is customer first. So their mindset as an airline was about, how do we make sure that the experience on board is as memorable as possible. So that was a very interesting example for me. And then the last one is very much about company culture. And I think one of the things I've learned is the companies that are doing really well today, they really work hard on their culture, and they really work hard on not only having a culture, but making sure that they recruit for fit, i.e. not just skills and capabilities, but they actually recruit, that they look for people who fit the culture. And I think one of the things I find is that the personal values and company values match. Is people, when I've worked with people, when they feel happiest is when there is something about them, i.e., in their own personal values, that absolutely overlap with what the company they're working for stands for, and vice versa. And therefore, it's a more of a natural fit. And that's where, again, where this came from, the personal and company values match, was partly through my experience with McLaren when I was working with them. And one of the issues they'd found is that they, as they were growing, they were hiring a lot of engineers from BMW, the German car manufacturer. And what they found interesting was that although these people were very, very highly skilled engineers, they were quite what I call Germanic. They were quite robotic in terms of the way they worked. And McLaren wasn't like that. McLaren was a bit crazy. It was very fast paced. It was very creative. It was very organic. And therefore, the BMW people didn't really fit. And they left. And it made McLaren think through, actually, they need to be clearer about who they're recruiting. They need to be recruiting not just for their skills, but do they fit the culture? And my last little anecdote before we talk more openly about this is from Nike, and the sports manufacturer. And this is an old anecdote, but it's still very true, but it gives an example of what they were doing. So when Nike Town opened in London, a friend of mine at the time, he went over to talk to the store manager and said, oh, it's really interesting and exciting that you're opening. How do you recruit people? And he said something very, very interesting, because most people in retail in London would start by saying, well, who else have you worked for? Nike didn't do that. Their first question when somebody came along to be interviewed was, who won the men's 100 meters at the Atlanta Olympics? And if you didn't know the answer, you never got to question 2. And I think the moral of the story was actually, if you weren't interested in sports, then, you know, why would you want to work for Nike? Although that's an old example, they still use it today in a different way. So if you go on to, you know, Nike online and you look at their recruitment page, the first thing you get asked is, who are your favorite sports people that Nike have endorsed? So they're immediately looking in their recruitment process for what you would think is the most obvious thing, would be, well, why on earth would you not want, if you weren't interested in sports, why would you want to work for Nike? And yet so many businesses, they don't do that. You know, they don't look at, you know, they don't think through what are the people really interested in, and therefore quite often they end up hiring the wrong people, because, and I think that is one of the dangers businesses have when they grow, is they don't think about their culture, they don't think about who fits, and if you gradually start employing the wrong people, over time you lose the culture. You lose that sense of who you are and what you stand for. So, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, that's a sort of an overview, if you like, of those 6 best-in-class company behaviours. And I think my point is that none of those are difficult. You know, they're not. You know, they're not. None of them are difficult to do. It's all about a mindset. And it's all about a mindset of saying, do we think these things are important? And if we do, and I think for me, this is the difference, is that the businesses that seem to be doing well nowadays, if I go back through those, you know, the ones that are succeeding, they know that what they do and what they say must match. Otherwise, they'll be found out. You know, and you know, social media is cruel. You know, something that is people find out is on Instagram or Twitter, and suddenly it can go viral very, very quickly. These companies also know that the more they listen, the more they understand, the more they can keep themselves, you know, fresh and be curious. They know that actually to succeed, you have to be brave. You have to do things in a different way. But you have to do it in a way that's disciplined within the company. You have to constantly move on. You have to think about the customer experience, and you have to work on your culture. And that's what I think is exciting. You know, because actually this isn't about strategy as such. This is about how do you excite people to think in a different way.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I think that was a very, very detailed and you know, very insightful explanation of all the 6 principles, you know, which are mentioned in your book.
And I think I've kept to your timing, Hector, as well.
Yeah. Okay, so the next half hour is for everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, this is right now, you know, when I'm talking to all these people, and I've been having some few discussions before you arrived also. They want to discuss, you know, these 6 principles with you according to their own experience in their as you know, working in their own organizations, and their own anecdotes and experiences they want to share regarding these principles. So firstly, I'd like to ask Vishal. Vishal, you had something to say about the image and experience match, so let's hear you out.
Right, Ekta. Thanks a lot. So, you know, I had a couple of examples as a customer myself. And the 2 companies that I wanted to speak about is Amazon and Viva. Mark, you would remember that the last article that I published. I mean, this is something that I touched upon there. So,
yeah, we found one of it.
Yeah. So this is a couple of years back. I had ordered something for my parents from Amazon. It was actually a heavy laptop stand, and, you know, it was too heavy for them. I didn't check the weight or something. Something that I did not notice at the time of ordering was that it is a non-returnable item. Now, being in HR, someone being curious, you know, about vision and mission and values, I thought, let me just test Amazon. And, very clearly we know Amazon says that, we aspire to become, to be the most customer-centric company on the planet, right? I said, okay, let me test it. So I just dialed in the number to the customer care. There was a lady who picked up, and I explained the situation to me. I acknowledged that, it's my mistake. I just overlooked the part which said non-returnable. And this is where I am, and I can't use the product. Is there something that you can do for me? And unlike what I expected from other brands, someone who throw the rule book at me, or say that we had clearly written it on the website, or send us a mail. I'll get back to you in, I don't know, a week's time or something. She just put my call on hold for a couple of minutes, and worth pointing out, this is someone who's at the bottom of the corporate food chain. It's a customer care agent. She just put my call on hold for a couple of minutes, and lo and behold, she came back to the call. She said, we've taken your request. Tomorrow, somebody will be there at your door to pick up the product. And it was absolutely amazing and fabulous experience. I'm very sure, and I've had experiences, through my life, through various brands and their customer care services and agents, but this was exceptional. And I thought it's worthwhile pointing this out. I am a fan, Amazon fan for life. I am a loyal customer. I have deleted all other e-commerce apps, and it's been a few years now. From the smallest of things to the largest, I don't know, electronic items or something, it is Amazon for me, right? So they really lived up to their vision statement that they profess, right?
Can I make a couple of comments on that? Because I think what's interesting about what you've said, because it brings alive two things for me. Is this whole idea of what I call being in the moment, i.e. they listened to what you were saying, rather than they were stuck on script. And I think this is the problem that most people have with the call center, is that the person is on script, and therefore they're not adjusting what they're saying to what's going on in front of them. And the other thing, which I think is very interesting, but it's a perfect example of empowerment, which is a word that is one of those business words which I think sometimes is not great because people misuse it. But obviously she obviously had to check, but she was ultimately empowered to sort something out for you.
Yes.
And rather than you having to say, oh, well, can you email me the issue and we'll get back to you in 3 days? And therefore, it's not just the action, it's how they did it that has, resulted in what you just said, which is, you being a fan. And I think it's a little bit of my little Financial Times example where, no business is perfect. Nothing goes in a straight line. And often, the companies that are, live these behaviors, when something goes wrong, they really know how to sort it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I add something here?
Yes.
I'd like to add something here. So, this example is of a brand. Now, if we go back to our basics and we go to the, basic local shop, the local shop vendor we have, various shops we buy from. If we have a good customer experience over there, then we'll try to go back again and again. And this is, I'm talking about the past times when we were not so used to buying online. And that's, I think each one of us has experienced that if you go to a shop and if you have to return something and the person actually treats you well, you would like to go back to that shop again and again. And if it is just the opposite, then you try to just say, no, we are not going back here again.
Right.
So I think, everybody will agree with me here, because all of us have had such experiences.
Right. And it was not only a transactional interaction, it meant more, right? Like Mark said, someone was actively listening to me. They were empathetic, right? And I think that's what great customer retention is about.
it actually comes from the person who's owning that shop. So here, the person who's on the
Yeah.
leadership side, he's actually deciding, how the people at the lower level are behaving. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And
Carry on.
I think you've touched on something that is absolutely right. So what goes wrong? So because what we're talking about should be obvious. And the corner shop, the independent store. Ironically, one of the things that has been interesting about the lockdown here is we've become much more reliant on local people. And actually, it's been great because they know their product, they love what they do, and you get service with a smile. And so what goes wrong for me is it's leadership. These companies grow and people don't feel empowered. They feel on script. There isn't this sense of looking after the customer. And you use the word transactional. It just becomes a transactional experience. And if it's just a transactional experience, you've got no equity, you've got no relationship, and therefore, you'll only ever go to that place as long as it's there. But if somebody comes along with something better or cheaper, you'll just go there.
Right. The other example I wanted to take was of WeWork, irrespective of whatever is happening around in terms of their financials, etc. But this is a very honest opinion in terms of their customer. So as a solopreneur, I've worked out of many co-working offices, right? Nothing beats WeWork. Yeah, their mission statement actually is to create a world where people work to make a life and not just a living. So even as a solopreneur, when I used to go to the office, which is my WeWork cubicle, right? It was so much about community, right? It was so much about people interaction, right? They leverage synergies. They were internal software, like something like a Facebook wall where you can talk to people, where you can interact, you can find directories. So even as a single person, as a solopreneur, I didn't feel like I'm just another person in a cubicle. I had the entire world of information. I had other people to speak to, and I think they do a very good work with community building.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a beautiful experience there. And like I said, I've gone to the almost all co-working spaces, but WeWork really stood out for me. And when their vision, when it says that you come to WeWork to make a life and not just make a living, I felt it to be really true, right? It was, again, Mark, going back to the transaction stuff. I was not only renting a cubicle, right? It was much bigger than that. You really feel a part of a larger community, even when those people are not directly working with.
Very good.
Yeah. Just one point last point I wanted to add to the image and experience point, because we spoke of customers. Often companies forget about employees, right?
Yeah.
And how do we make promises to employees is through our mission, through our vision, through our core values, right? I'll take a very small example without naming companies. There are companies, there's a company which claims to be very high on agility and speed of execution, right? Now that core value looks beautiful as a poster on the wall and on their careers page.
Yeah.
Right. But what happens internally is that full and final payments take 90 days time.
Yeah.
Sales commissions take 60 days to be credited.
Yeah.
Right. Employee reimbursements take, I don't know, another 75 days. Right. So there's a big mismatch between what you say and what you do.
Yeah.
So the first point of image and experience match, it is definitely true for customers, but it is also true for a company.
Totally agree.
Internal customers, which are their employees.
I totally agree, and normally, the problem starts with the employees and then feeds onto the customers. And you make another good point, which is, so many value statements and mission statements are put on websites or put on the wall. I always say, always say that if you walk into an office and you find the vision and values on the wall, it's going to be a bad experience, because because it's not about being on the wall, and people need to live it. And this is why, and again, it's leadership. People either believe in this or they don't. And I think this is where so many companies become fake. Is that they say one thing and do another. And I don't know whether it's. I'm sure it's true with you as well. But I think one of the interesting things for me is that what the good old millennials and Generation Z, the 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, the vast majority of them, they want a company to be authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a real shift over the last 10 years. And they want to. It's not just buying from it; they want to work for a company that they believe in. Right. And yes, sometimes people have got to go and work because they need the money. But when given the choice, they really want to work for something that has got some ethics, has got some values, which are true, not just stuck on the wall.
Okay, so Vishal, anything more anybody wants to say on this point? Nobody wants to add on?
No, I think let's move on. There are so many interesting stories that we'll all have to share, but I guess they're all interrelated. I think when we address those specific points, we'll be able to touch upon.
That's true. Mark, we might stretch a little on the time because...
No, I'm fine. I'm here for as long as you want.
Okay, thank you so much.
No, I'm here for as long as you want me to be here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Now,
you.
I'll come to Dr. Prashant now. And Dr. Prashant, what would you like to add on the Innovate Constantly bit? Yeah?
Yeah. So for me, actually, innovation stems from the mindset of the top management. The companies who innovate are the ones where the top management is determined that it is to be a part of their DNA. And one example which comes to my mind, first thing is Apple.
Yeah.
Apple has not been feeding a demand or fulfilling a demand. They were creating a demand. They created a demand way back by creating an iPod, and then they went on to an iPhone or to an iPad and an Apple Watch. Once they created the demand, then they fulfilled it. And how that innovation happened was because they had unparalleled investment in R&D, which most companies don't do. They want to innovate, but they want to invest in the R&D part of it.
Yeah.
And the success of it is very evident that Apple became the first company to hit $1 trillion market cap and has over $250 billion of cash reserves, which is equal to a third world country foreign reserves.
Yeah.
And that is something which I think we need to look at it. If I look at the past 3 months and I see the COVID affected pandemic, which Mark kind of said that people who have been innovating are able to sail through, we are now seeing a sudden rush, and especially in healthcare, everybody out of a compulsion wanting to innovate, which because they've been caught up. They have been like, now they are lost. They don't know what to do. So what they're doing now is, okay, now patients in our scenario are not coming to us because they are fearful of going to a hospital and catching the COVID infection. So what now the companies are wanting to do is, let's use technology and reach to their doorstep, and let's try telemedicine, and let's try home healthcare. But I find that this will be transitory. It will be only for a while. Once the environment goes back to normal, all these companies will go back to their old of not innovating because it was not part of their DNA. This was more like a compulsion right now. That's why they did it. In healthcare, it's that we have had a lot of innovation has happened in healthcare. It's not that it's not happened. We've got robots doing surgeries. We've got a platform like IBM Watson, which is helping doctors to not just diagnose cancer, but also plan treatment. I think the best innovation comes is when you listen to the demands of your customers and patients and then innovate. So I'll give you a couple of small examples in our case, that for an eye hospital, the major problem that we face is that, patients have to wait for a long time. They come and they spend sometimes 2, 3, 4 hours. So they had told us, that is a
a bothering thing, and there's lack of communication. They don't know what's happening and how much time it will take. Now, all of us have ridden a train, and if you go online, you can know in how many minutes the next station will come. So you have that, that sense of peace that, okay, 20 minutes in a station is about to come.
Yeah.
So what we are planning in our company is that to have an app where a patient logs in the moment he walks into the hospital, and he's told about the estimated time of the entire process, right down to how much time it will take for the next process to start and the entire process to end. So he's on a live medium knowing about it. So there is no sense of anxiety and apprehension that patient is having, and that solves his problem. And that's something we want to do. And then another thing was patients wanted to have access to us all through the day, night, whenever they want to see. But now the point is our call center is not 24/7. So what we have done is we have had a AI-powered chatbot. Now we call it the Siri for healthcare or Alexa for healthcare, which answers everything, not just your common queries about, just taking an appointment. So just imagine if a patient is just chatting and says, okay, where is your nearest hospital? So we tell them how far is it and give the shortest possible route also from where they are sitting. So you go to that level, use AI, because right now AI is providing you that platform. So use that to make it convenient that even though it's a virtual call or it's AI, but they still get all the answers that they seek for. And I feel one thing that we all should realize is that, change is constant. Everybody knows that. We also need to constantly innovate.
Exactly.
Because the customer needs and expectations are changing very frequently. So if you're not catching up with that, you will be left behind. And the companies who refuse to change are the ones who will be kind of lost, and people won't remember them. So I think it is a existential question when it comes to, we need to innovate. And once you are able to do that, innovate constantly, you'll be able to, I have a question for Mark out of this basically. What would be your advice to a company who truly believes that they can manage without investing on innovation? What would be your advice to that company?
I think I just pointed them to a series of business failures. And right at this moment, I've got no sympathy to a lot of businesses that are really struggling. I mean, obviously, I've got sympathy for the employees that are involved, but if you think about, one of my companies I hate is British Airways. Because of what it's become, and it's a mindset from the top, which is driven by money. It's driven by the return on investment, rather than what we've been talking about, which is if you get the employee experience, customer experience right, then you get loyalty and the money comes. And I think the issue on innovation is to get people to look around. And you look at the businesses that are, and again, if I refer to something that happened, there was a series of articles in the Financial Times over the last few weeks about the top 100 companies that are successful during COVID, and they all have innovation within their DNA. So I think the top. It was Apple, Microsoft, Netflix, it was Zoom, what we're dealing with now, it was Shopify. The businesses, a huge number of biopharma companies, huge number of communication companies, but it's shown that if you have the innovation as part of your philosophy, then that's when that's what you need to do in order to keep growing. And I think it's showing up, frankly, bad leadership, because those people who think that and there are people out there still who run businesses who think it's what I call a cookie cutter, and it's a phrase from UK in terms of stores, is people think, right, we've got the ideal concept, we're going to run that concept out forever. And therefore it's just a cookie cutter, and it means that everything becomes stale after a while, because we are so used to things moving on. I mean, look, I mean, here we are, and I'm loving this. It's so lovely talking to you, but, we're using Zoom, we're having a very interactive discussion about something that means a lot to us in a way that maybe we wouldn't have done 2 years ago or even 6 months ago. And therefore, I think that's it's the evidence that is out there to say, if you don't innovate, you will be, as so many of the businesses that are going under now, you will go under. There, you can't, if you can't stand still. If you stand still, you go backwards.
So, Dr. Prashant, you want to add anything here?
No, I got my answer.
You got your answer. Okay. So, Harini, we come to you next. So, what do you have to say about constantly inside the head of the customer?
Yeah, so Mark, it has been amazing. Yeah, it has been amazing listening to your the principles and your experiences, which actually have made the book. I have some stories to share because I'm a behavioral scientist and I have been practicing a lot of social experiments within my organization and for the clients to whom we consult. So I've been a big follower of Ricardo Semler's Simcoe Style principles, and that's where I'm a practitioner right now. And I have been noticing that a lot of my successful experiences in my past have been very much in alignment with the Simcoe Style principles. And amazingly, the principles that are there in Simcoe Style have a complete alignment with the principles that you spoke about.
Okay.
So what I'll do is, since I thought about talking of constantly being in the customer's heads and also talking about brave leadership, I thought let me talk about both of them together because they are interrelated, and my anecdotes will go back and forth on all of them. So one of the experiments I carried out with a certain group was to teach the team members what empathy is all about, because it was a service function. And teaching empathy is not easy because there's no real formula on how you teach. So one of the experiments I did was I got them to do an exercise which I had named as walk the talk. And it's a very simple exercise wherein everyone in that service function fixes himself or herself as a champion for a group of people, a reasonably manageable group of people. And all that an individual has to do is connect with each one in that group once a fortnight. And that happens without fail. Once a fortnight, you do a one-to-one conversation with each of them to whom you have assigned yourself a champion. And all these conversations are meant to be agenda-less conversations. You don't fix a meeting. You don't tell them that I'm coming to meet you at this time. But in your timetable, it works. And you meet this person once a fortnight. And what do you do in those conversations? When they're agenda-less conversations, it could be you may be traveling with them, you may have coffee with them, you may decide to go have lunch with them, whatever it may be. But what happens when the conversation is agenda-less? You end up speaking about what's going on in your mind. So what actually happened is the customers or the stakeholders of this individual would come up speaking what's going on in their minds. And a lot of things would be just about random experiences around the place, random experiences around the service or the product. And all that this service representative has to do is to make a note of it on once he's back at his desk and make a periodic summary of a collection of all of these experiences. And the only other thing that he or she needs to do is the next time you go and meet the same person, which is after a fortnight, you have to go with some solutions to what could have become a problem. So what happens is a lot of problems or expectations came right into the forefront even before they became a problem. So even before the customer could realize that this is a potential problem or a concern, he saw that a solution is already there in front of him. So this brought about a tremendous amount of customer experience. So this is an experiment which worked out beautifully well, where you don't go and tell somebody that, look, I'm your customer service representative, please tell me what problems you had. So when you put a person in such a situation, invariably they start creating problems to talk about it, because you need something to fill that agenda. But when you have an agenda-less conversation, a lot of aspirational ideas come there, a lot of how I wish it were so thoughts come there. And all these become action plans for the service provider or the product developer or someone who's designing the product to come up with something which is even better. So this was something where I think the Walk the Talk was an amazing experiment, which actually put every single individual in the customer service function constantly into the heads of the customer. So this is something where I completely align with this principle, and I'm sure this experiment can be replicated in not just for service provider organizations or product designers, but even for simple customer service functions within an organization, say an human resources function. It becomes very easy to implement this and constantly be in the minds or inside the heads of your internal customers or your stakeholders. And it would be an amazing world where every individual in the organization gets a fantastic experience at the workplace. So how did we get into all of this? Now, I'll quickly touch upon bravery and being disciplined as well. So in Semco Style, we talk about some concepts under extreme stakeholder alignment, which is being constantly in the heads of the customers. What actually does it? It gives every service provider an outside-in perspective. When you're having these agenda-less conversations with your customer, you get a perspective from the customer side. That's what we call as the outside-in perspective. And with the outside-in perspective, where you reach is a common ground. Because in that agenda-less conversation, you're also telling the customer what your challenges are if you have to cater to all that the customer expects. And what you really go there is, you reach a common ground. And if you're consistently delivering to that, I think you have that customer for life. Even not just a customer that will actually help in expanding your business, because a customer will be able to talk stories about your customer service as to how you were able to look at things from their perspective. So that's one experience which I wanted to add from being on this side and where the experiments work. Now, how does one really drive this? It's not very easy to, I tell my team that you just go ahead and put yourself in the shoes of the customer. It doesn't happen. Empathy doesn't happen like that. And how does one do that is, first of all, I need to lead by example. So the leader, first of all, needs to acknowledge that there is a change we need to do in the way we work. There is something that we need to do differently. There is something that we need to do better to be right there. And it all starts with brave leadership. So like we say in our Semco Style intervention, the very first step, I think the starting point of any transformation of this sort, which is actually a change in the mindset. Because when you're talking about really getting into the customer's heads all the time, it is a mindset change. I have to dissociate myself from my body and go and sit in the customer's mind. So change in the mindset needs to be driven by brave leadership. And I think that's what it talks about when you talk about bravery, acknowledging that we need to change the way we work, acknowledging that there is something we can do to make things better. And the first and foremost way of how you drive that leadership is to build trust. So if I have to tell my team that this is something which is an experiment, but it's going to work and you're going to make it work, I would be having an adult to adult conversation with my team, build transparency within my team, saying that this is what we are trying to achieve, and this is the idea I have in mind. What do you think about it? So the team comes with apprehensions, would come with concerns. Some of them would be excited to try. It depends on the personality type of each individual. But nevertheless, they would go ahead and try it because they want to see if this works. So the moment I start having an adult to adult conversation with my team members with complete transparency, saying, even if it fails, it's okay. I had this famous line, which I used to say, that success is yours and failure is mine. And when I build this kind of transparency with hardly any power distance, you can come up and tell me if the things are not working. You can come up and tell me if this idea is never going to work. If that's what you feel, please, feel free to come and tell me. With that kind of transparency in the leadership and reducing power distance, I think that's where being a brave leader is all about. It's about coming down from that pedestal, being empathetic with your own team members or with people who you're utilizing to drive the change. And like I recently said in one of my recent one-liner posts, that while one needs to get into others' shoes to be empathetic, I think it's also equally important for one to stay within one's own skin and be authentic. So one needs to be empathetic in thoughts and in connecting with people, but one needs to be authentic when it comes to actions. And like you said right in the beginning, there has to be no gap between thoughts and actions. And that's where I think it builds credibility. Yeah. So these were my couple of experiments in the social space, in the commercial space around your principles. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I think what's lovely about all this conversation with everybody is how we have a lot of common thinking, and you know, getting people to think differently, or behavioural change, or whatever you call it. I mean, I've learned really over the years that and that's why the thing I find most important is it's through people's experience, is if they get something, and therefore that's why in my work I start off with a customer experience that you love. And you know, obviously you can't really do this in the same way at the moment, but if I'm working with a client live, one of the things I do if I'm in a city is I get people to physically go and be a customer, and take them round, or give them an itinerary of 10 or 12 places to go and visit, and everybody does the same thing. And what happens is that both good and bad people get this visceral experience of suddenly they walk into somewhere, and it doesn't need a PowerPoint presentation to explain to them whether they feel good or not. It's what they feel. And I think the reason why I start there is because once people think through, okay, I walked into that store and actually nobody listened to me, or they didn't know about their product, or they were disrespectful, or they couldn't care, or they were just transactional. And obviously people think, well, hang on a minute, how would I feel if I'm doing that? You know, if I'm delivering that experience, I would feel bad. And therefore, you know, for me, what I've learned is if you start with people, starting with the heart, you suddenly realize that actually everything we've been talking about, is a simple mindset. But if we do it in the right way, then people start to think through, okay, I get that, and therefore I understand why this is important, because I don't want to have that experience myself. It doesn't, I think what's interesting is people, obviously sometimes we do want a transactional experience because we just need to go and buy something quickly and we need to go. But most people, if they, whether it's with a business or the company they work for, or the hospital they go to, or the airline they go on, they want to have a relationship, because they want to feel good about that experience. And I think you use the word empathy a lot. And I think this is the biggest challenge for many CEOs, and you'll be glad about this, particularly men, is that they struggle with empathy, and they struggle with the fact that actually, because quite often they've got to the top of their business through being very good at process or operations or finance. But actually nowadays, as I've said, most employees want their boss, their ultimate CEO, to be good at empathy. They want the business they want to feel that they're belonging to something, and they want to feel that they are being cared for, and you can't do that through PowerPoint. You can't do that through faking it, and therefore, and I think this is what is a real challenge for many bosses now, is that people want to feel part of a team. I think I mean, it's interesting. Again, I have going back to my feelings about how employees feel, is that most employees nowadays, and particularly anybody under 30, but I'm being pejorative about that, most employees, they want two things from their bosses, in my opinion. They want clarity. you know, here are the goals, here are the objectives, this is why we're doing it. But they want to feel that they're involved. They want to feel that they are collaborating in creating, bringing that future to life. And the old style businesses, which was very much, you know, do as I tell, you know, I'm the boss, do it, just do it, just don't really work anymore, because people reject that. People reject that sort of toxic, egotistical, you know, leadership, where and obviously they still exist in business, but I do think COVID will be shaking a lot of these people out, because people will be wanting different things. But I think that's where many CEOs fail, is they don't understand the fact that people want to feel as though they are collaborating on bringing something to life. And I actually call this, I mean, it's interesting, I sort of mentioned this in the book, I call this what I call the Facebook effect, the positive side of Facebook, in as much as that people have grown up with liking, commenting, adding, you know, chatting about something they see, and they want that from work. You know, they want to feel as though they are involved. They want to feel that they are, sorry, that's my wife's telephone that's going, business line. They want to feel that they are involved. And I think, so the way you're talking makes absolute sense to me.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for adding to what Harini had to say. Somebody wants to add something to this? Yeah?
Just one small point, and Harini, you spoke of
Sure, Vishal.
bravery and trust and empathy, and, you know, leadership being an area of interest that I explore and research. I think why it is so difficult is, I think this arises for the individual from accepting their vulnerabilities, and that is not easy, and that doesn't happen, and that is not how we've grown up. That is not how we are conditioned. Yeah. And this is the reason we have very, very few rightful leaders in the corporate world today.
No, I totally agree, and you know, I think I mean, it's interesting. I mean, to give an example, I mean, I think many politicians have been found wanting over the last 3 months, and now, ladies, you're going to enjoy what I'm going to say, because the politicians that seem to have coped best have been women, and you know, probably the best example is the lady who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, in terms of how she behaves and how she talks and how she communicates. And of course, in terms of physical success, in terms of how they've dealt with coronavirus, they've been one of the most successful countries in the world. But you know, she can do empathy, and she's not faking it. And that's what people want, you know, because if you're going to ask to change your behavior, then you've got to do it in a way that you know, the person that's telling you, particularly in this situation, you trust and you believe, and you know, it's a sad indictment on many male politicians that they don't do that because they can't.
Very true.
And it's not like Vishal was saying, it's not easy to be vulnerable. There's a lot of insecurity that, you know, hovers largely on people's minds, and therefore it really takes a lot of courage for a leader to say that success is yours and failure is mine. You know, if you attach too much of weight to the word failure, it becomes difficult. But if you look at failure, where every leader is able to leverage on that failure and help the team towards success, I think that becomes easy. So servant leadership somewhere is, it's just that one needs to make that effort to try and.
Well, I think, I mean, you know, and I'd be happy to do this because there's a whole part of my book that I that is about best-in-class leadership behaviors rather than just company behaviors. And you know, one of the things I talk about is being what I call being on stage all the time. You know, which is you know, a boss is on stage all the time, and you know how they behave, he or she, people are looking at all of the time. And it's not just a question of when they do the big PowerPoint presentation or the annual company meeting. You know, it's how they are in a meeting, how they operate when they walk in the door, how they talk to people, and a lot of bosses don't understand that. You know, they think it's fine. They can go and do a big, company meeting once a year and relate, or try and relate to people in that way. But that's not what people want anymore. They look all the time at how people are behaving, and they make judgments. And I think this is really, I mean, obviously I use this whole idea of heart and head a lot, but you know, the best bosses, I mean, interestingly, they don't, you know, you said something, I think it was you that said this, Harini, you know, which is being comfortable in your own skin. And it's interesting. Virtually all of my clients in my work, the CEOs are comfortable in their own skin, because and it doesn't mean to say they haven't got chaos going on in their private lives. You know, I first met somebody who's become a good friend of mine, who was the CEO of a bank in Sweden about 8 years ago, and I met him over breakfast once, and we got on incredibly well from the beginning, and he was very open, very curious, very interested in what I was talking about, and we went on to work together in his new role as the CEO of a bank. And I found out later on that, you know, he was in the middle of this messy divorce, and therefore, you know, his personal life wasn't great, but he was very comfortable in who he was as a person. And I do think this is one of the problems that, and again, it's often a male thing rather than a female thing, is people get to the top of an organization and are frightened they're going to get found out. You know, because they've got to a place where they're not comfortable in their own skin. You know, they might have got there through hard work, or they might have got there through, you know, having the best sales target that they've reached or whatever. But actually, they are a bit fake, and therefore, you know, often when I talk to people about CEOs that have gone wrong, or they've lost it, and I talk to the organisation after the CEO's gone, they will always say they were bad communicators, you know, and actually often a bully. And I think that was always a sign for me of somebody that's not comfortable in their own skin, is they put this barrier around and push people and antagonize people. And, you know, obviously for years and years and years, that behavior was tolerated in many businesses. But, you know, to me, that's the shift. You know, young people won't put up with that anymore. You know, they're not going to be bullied. And if you think, you know, Black Lives Matter, you think the Me Too campaign, you know, you think climate change activists, you know, this is all largely a younger generation saying, you know what, we're not putting up with this anymore. You know,
power distance led to you know, bullying looking like it's legitimate, but I think the young generation is just not going to accept it. So with bullying not being legitimate anymore, I think the power distance in organizations also will start crumbling.
I agree, and I mean, I think this is where, again, I refer to it. You know, UK people that run a lot of the big UK retail stores, I mean, they've been bullies. you know, and therefore the customer experience is poor, the employee experience is poor, they don't innovate, they don't do any of the best in class company behaviors, and they're all going bankrupt. You know, every day they're going, so they're being found out. Yeah. You know, and this is my point to you all. You know, I think, I mean, all of the way all of you are thinking, I love it. I mean, I think it's an Hector, I think it's amazing how, you know, you've done a great job, because at the end of the day, you know, there's a lot of common understanding that's going on, and I'm very excited that we're having these conversations, because, you know, it's when I wrote the book, I had no idea where it would go and who would be interested, and et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, what's lovely is, you know, the whole idea of the business case for love is essentially what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So I had a point to add, actually, to the things which all of you are saying, that I think, and it's more pertinent today in these times than ever, right, is that as leaders, we have to ensure that people in their family, at the organization, need to feel safe.
Exactly.
And currently, the climate is that we are not feeling safe.
Yeah.
And then in this kind of lack of safety, you can't expect productivity. You can't expect passion to come out, because people will be kind of withholding themselves, get into a shell, and it will affect, end of the day, how the company is performing. And I think this is something the leaders have to take up to ensure that each one in their family feels safe.
I totally agree, and I think this is where well, you know, I think I mean, I think we're all linked in now, aren't we? So you know, if you're interested, I mean, you know, some of the articles I've written over the last few months, I mean, I talk about heroes and villains from you know, during the pandemic, and for me, I'll give you a very good example to illustrate the point about feeling safe, which was actually to do with redundancies, and I don't know, other than being a customer, I don't know the founder, but this is Airbnb and Brian Chesky, and he had to lay off 25% of his workforce, and what was interesting is that, which is the same number as British Airways have been laid off. So British Airways have basically just fired people, but what Brian Chesky did with Airbnb was say, how do we make the right decision, and how do we involve people that actually, so people understand why that we are having to make these decisions. And if you are unfortunately one of those people who are going to be made redundant, it's not because of you. It's not because of a failure of you. It's because what we are doing as a business is using our core principles to say we need to go back to our roots. So his way of describing the decisions to his organization was saying, what we're having to do is retrench, but we're going to go back to our core, our roots, our core values. And therefore, basically what that meant is all the new things they had done, you know, that to add, you know, volume and you know, new products, they've stopped. And therefore, those people associated with that were the ones that had to go. But when he was talking to the organization, he basically said, you know, he said, well, actually, he used the word love. You know, the most important thing is is those who are leaving, you know, feel loved. That it's not to do with the fact they were bad people. It's the fact of the job that they were doing. And those that were staying, we need to work even harder at making people feel safe, that feel good about what they're doing, and confident to move on. And that's leadership. You know, it's just, you know, I think it's interesting listening to you guys. You know, it's just something it's not just you're born with, it's something you believe. You either believe in this way of working or you don't. Right. You know, you either believe in saying people matter, you know, we want to create a culture, we want to create this mindset, or you don't. And I think this comes back to this whole idea of being comfortable in your own skin. is that most people who are comfortable in their own skin, by definition, they are open-minded, they are curious, they are interested in listening in. And I'm sure, you know, there are people that you can think of who will be listening into our conversation to that now, and they think, you know, we're mad. You know, I totally disagree with everything they're saying, because, you know, isn't business all about saying, you know, just get on and do it, guys? You work harder and earn some money at the end of the day, and that's all people will be interested in. And there are people out there like that, but I just think, you know, they're being found out, and therefore, you know, the shift in requirement for leadership is rapid. And again, I say in one of my, you know, LinkedIn articles, I say, you know, you can't wait for the McKinsey report now. You know, you can't wait the 6 months for that to come in. You've got to, you know, you know, the best leaders now, they know what to do now, because they've got a strong moral compass as well as a strong company compass as to what to do and what not to do.
Thank you, Mark. And we are almost like close to 7 o'clock, and we still have more points to go. So I'll come to Dr. Prashant. And you are in operations, and you know, a lot of operations are related to what the customer actually feels also. Yeah. So when you are actually planning your operations, ultimate customer experience is one of the key factors. So what is your ideas about, you know, generating a, you know, memorable customer experience?
So, Ekta, if you look at, you know, 50 years ago, you had two economies. You know, you had the goods economy and the service economy. Then recently you had a third economy added, which was the experience economy. You know, and if you look at even healthcare, 30 years ago, about 42% of the patients were choosing a hospital based on the doctor they wanted to consult, not anything else. That number has now come down to just 20%. And what has taken its place is about 41% of people are choosing a hospital based on reviews and feedback and what their friends and family tell them about what they experienced in that hospital. So it's not the doctor now, it is the experience. And when you talk about experience, for me, the most important metric in the tool comes is NPS, the Net Promoter Score, you know, which was introduced by Fred Reichheld in 2002 in a HBR article. And now if you look at 2/3 of the Fortune 1000 companies are using them. So when you are rating on an NPS, you're not just getting what they felt about your experience, they're also telling you whether we will commit loyalty to you. And secondly, whether we'll become your brand ambassador and bring other people back to your business or not. So if you are growing or not growing, that also is determined by the NPS. If you have a poor NPS, it's very unlikely that you will get new customers. Yeah. So what we do in our company is that we are tracking our Net Promoter Score across our hospitals and the group on a daily basis. So it's not a monthly exercise. We are doing it. So the focus on the NPS is that every day there is a report that across the group through the feedbacks, what is the NPS? So for that, we need to tap into the customer or the patient journey. We need to map that journey and find out what are the pain points of that patient or the customer and address them. Yeah. And if in healthcare, I want to take an example, I think the zenith or the epitome of experience and empathy, which Harini was talking about in healthcare, is Cleveland Clinic. So they are the ones who gave empathy as a topic to discuss to healthcare. And they realize the value of experience that, you know, they have placed a C-suite person as a CXO, they call it, which is the Chief Patient Experience Officer. So you have the CEOs and the COs and the CFOs. Now you have a CXO whose only job is to look at how the patient experience is and to improve it. You know, and if you look at, you know, Starbucks doesn't sell coffee. Starbucks sells experiences. That is what differentiates it from the other brands. And then when you go into a Starbucks, you have people giving interviews, people working on projects. They are experiencing it. So coffee is just an excuse. They want to go there. That's what differentiates, you know, brands. And that's why you pay a premium. You're willing to pay a premium because you value that, the experience it provides you. So I'll give you an example of, again, I'll go back to Apple. It's one of the brands that keep going back with examples and experiences. Way back in 2011, when the iPad 2 was launched, that was the last product which Steve Jobs was connected, and then he sadly passed away. So I was in US on training for a particular assignment, and I stood in queue for about 6 hours to buy that on the first day, which is the habit which people, I wanted to experience that, what's into, stand in queue for 6 hours and buy a product. First, I met a whole lot of fanboys, who were, had small chairs and had novels and had, sandwiches and everything. And we were talking about what we felt about Apple. So the 6 hours just went away in 6 minutes. And the moment I entered the store, there was one guy who was dedicated. He was happier to sell that. And that experience, which is 9 years now, I still vividly remember that, buying a product from a store has become a story for me. So that is what experiences we die for. And if you look at, example I'll talk about is Southwest Air. Everybody has heard about. It's a fabulous airline, which is, the world's largest low-cost carrier. I've happened to see their website, and they talk about, that we like to think of ourselves as a customer service company that happens to fly airplanes. So, and the beauty about them having the focus on the customer service is that if you go on their Twitter page, they sometimes pin tweets about customer stories. So there was one story which I saw, which kind of resonated about, what we should all be doing is that there's a lady who was running a relay race up in the mountains, landed, and her baggage didn't come. So now she's frantic because next morning she's to, do the race, and she doesn't have any gear. Everything is lost. So there was an ex-Marine who was a Southwest Air officer who said, I promise you, I will get it to you. Don't worry. She went back to her hotel. The baggage came finally. This lady drove 3 hours one way to deliver it personally to that lady at the hotel and said, I told you so. And so now tell me, that lady will ever fly any other airline? No. So these are the kind of experiences which, make you, sold, and you are always going to remain loyal. I think the problem, Mark, I feel is that there are a lot of processes and systems which we develop to create memorable experiences. But the problem happens is the people on the ground who are to deliver those experiences are a mismatch or a misfit. So on ground, on a manual point of view, you're all set. You give the manual to the person and you say, now you deliver. But either the person wasn't trained well or the person wasn't right for the job. So the company vision is not translated on the ground. And that's, I think, one of the core moot points that we need to look at. How do companies handle that? So it is that what I talked about in my article, which Mark, you had talked about, the people, process equal profit. So the process was all set. It was the people part which was, not in place. And end of the day, what experience came out of it was something which they didn't find it as what they had promised. So you kind of over-promise and you under-deliver. And I think end of the day, it's the people who are there and how they connect with the organization. Are they as passionate? So that employee at that Annapolis store who sold me that iPad, I can still remember his face. It was like, it was his, ask that he had to do it, and he did it with pleasure. He was not doing it as a job. He was doing it because he loved it. And if we love our jobs, as I said again about the business case, if we will love our jobs and we love what we do, it will translate into the way we make those experiences wonderful and memorable that people will remember for years to come.
Well, I fundamentally agree with what you're saying, and a couple of comments to make. I mean, it's interesting because, as you know, we have the National Health Service, NHS, over here, and therefore the last 3 months, everybody's being, saying what a wonderful job they're doing, and obviously they are doing a wonderful job in many ways. But as an organisation, it's never had the customer at the heart of what it's been doing. It doesn't think like that. It doesn't think about the customer experience at all, or very rarely, and therefore is more reliant on you finding a fantastic doctor. So it's actually going backwards to what you were talking about. The experience is led by the individual rather than the mantra. and that's partly over here. One of the problems is nobody dares ever criticize the NHS publicly for good or bad, and we know that's one of the reasons why perhaps you end up with so many scandals associated with the NHS of poor practice and poor decision making, and leading to deaths and bad situations. And I think the leadership within that is poor, because they're very Jobsworth, what I call Jobsworth. They don't think like you. They don't think in the way you're talking. It's the completely the other way around. And yet you're absolutely right. Health of all things. If you are made to feel partly relaxed, and going back to the example you were using, if you know where you are in the system, and you know what's going on, and there's that constant communication, then obviously you relax. And so even if you might be feeling ill, at least you're worried that you feel as though you're in good hands. And I just feel the second point I wanted to raise was to me what goes wrong is this, what I call sheep, this process of what I call sheep dipping, which is actually companies have their values, and then they put people through an away day and say, right, here are our values, go and live them. And the way they go about it is completely wrong, because I think unless you touch the heart first, unless you start with belief. So your person Apple, that wasn't fake. He believed, he or she, they start with believing the company. If they believe in the company, and they believe in, and they love and they believe in what the company's sense of purpose is, and what I call the company spirit, then immediately you feel that. You don't, and that's the point I make when I get people to think about when I physically go out and send people out to be customers, because you could walk into a place, and if the person is disengaged or they couldn't care less, then that's probably not that person's fault. It's probably the fault of the culture they're operating in, that they think it's okay to not feel good about the company they work for, and therefore the sheep dipping bits is it all goes the wrong way around. It's like having you have a day of presentations, and then you go for a pizza at the end, and the pizza bit is the bit where everybody's supposed to get excited and energized about the day out, and then they go into their jobs the next day, and nothing changes, because you haven't started with the heart. You have to start with the heart. You have to start with, and ultimately, do I believe in the company I work for? If I believe in the company I work for, then actually, if we're trying to deliver a fantastic, memorable customer experience, it's because I want to. It's because I do love what I do, and that comes through immediately to customers. And the important thing about all this, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you draw a line, and it's interesting, and obviously I'm a great believer in NPS, although if you get a chance to read the part of the book I talk about this, my only issue with NPS is the net bit, is because often what I say to my clients, and I have something called the love grid, where the love bit is the 9s and the 10s, and if you get people to, if you do the simple score, would you recommend on a scale of 1 to 10, and you're getting scores of 9 and 10, then that shows you the real picture. So my only question, I think NPS has done wonders, and I'm a great fan, and it's helped me in what I do, because it's created an accreditation for what we're talking about, which is culture and behavior and customer experience. But I think it's interesting how you're using it, because I think a lot of businesses, they have it, but they don't know what to do with it. It gets overcomplicated, whereas actually what we're talking about is something very simple. Get people to believe in what they're doing, create that environment for them to be able to do that, create that sense of collaboration, that they're part of it, and you know, then they'll start to love it. And if they start to love it, then the customer recognizes it.
Thank you, Mark. Now, coming to the last of the 6 behaviors, I'll come to Vishal now. And Vishal, what are the personal values and the company values alignment basically? Would you like to speak on that? Yeah.
Right. And this time I'll take examples, from a company, Shuttle. I was heading HR for them for close to 4 years, and a very young company. Mark, when I joined, I mean, there were only 50 people. But what helped was that was the right time to set the culture, right?
Yeah.
More often than not, I've realized co-founders, companies, I mean, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people, core values not defined, culture not set, and then it's very, very late, right? So luckily, I had joined the organization at the time, where it was the perfect time. I also had very good co-founders in terms of their personal belief into people practices and culture, right? So less than 1 year into the organization, we already had our 7 core values defined in the organization, and how we built it into the people practices were starting off with talent acquisition. So besides evaluating people on domain skills, analytical ability, it was equally important to assess them on those 7 core values. So what I did was I created a behavioral event interviewing handbook, wherein I had 12 to 15 questions for each core value that the interviewers can ask the candidate and assess them, right? Now, imagine for early stage company, this wasn't easy, right? We're trying to scale, we're trying to grow, right? And most of the interviewing panel were people from sales, people from tech and the product background, young people, right? And for them, it's still so-called softer things, right? So we had to put our foot down, very categorically say that, it doesn't matter if the guy is a super achiever, if the guy is a high pot in the current organization. I don't care if he's met 200% of his targets year on year. If there isn't significant core value alignment, we are not going to hire those folks, right? And in order to test this hypothesis, 12 months down the line, I mean, we did some number crunching, and there were some very interesting insights that came up. People who were hired in line with our core values, 2 very important observations. One, they had larger tenures in the organization. 2, they turned out to be very good people managers.
Yeah.
With the 360.
Yeah.
These are numbers, right? This is not something soft or just on paper. This was proper analysis done, and these 2 things really came out, right? This was for prospective employees. Then we thought that there has to be a equally strong message sent to people internally as well. So in the 3rd year of Shuttle's operations, a couple of months prior to the appraisal, annual appraisal exercise, we announced that now performance appraisals will be done on those 7 core values, right? It was a very, very strong message, right? Now that doesn't mean that everything becomes intangible and becomes soft. I'll take an example. One of the core values was raising the bar. So if I have a sales guy who's met 150% of his targets, so yes, his quantifiable numbers, his KRAs and numbers remain there, but how it translated was he gets a very high score on raising the bar. So communication and how you present it to people becomes equally important, right? I am not taking away credit from him. I am not taking away his numbers from him, but I tell him that, you're doing very well on raising the bar, rather than saying you're doing exceptionally well on sales. Right? So, talent acquisition, performance management, we had to send an equally important message internally as well and to prospective employees, right? This worked very, very well for Shuttle, right? And even today, I think in the startup ecosystem, it has one of the best cultures here in India, right? One last point, I want to take a cue from my coaching conversations, right? And these days, for obvious reasons, career coaching has really shot up. Yeah. And I speak to people and they say that, not happy with my job, have been laid off, etc. One thing that I've observed, and maybe other panelists can also pitch in, is when people evaluate job offers, they check for salaries, they check for benefits, they check for job role, they check People who are smart enough also check their manager's background. They do ref checks on them. I haven't met a single person who says, I picked up this offer because I saw a very high core value alignment. This is something that I'm personally trying to profess and write about and speak about for a couple of years now. But I think as it is important for an organization to ensure that there is alignment, very high alignment between their core values and the person that they're hiring, I think a candidate also is equally responsible to ensure that they bring in the core value alignment aspect while they're evaluating job offers. It cannot only be about salaries and benefits and roles and designations. That's what I wanted to submit on this.
I think the good news is it is changing in a positive way. I mean, I as you were talking, I don't know whether there was a film out a few years ago called The Internship,
Yes,
which was a comedy film.
Seen that, yes.
Yeah, and you know, I said again, I use that in the book as an example of obviously, you know, the whole story of you know, it's not the jock, the successful one that gets hired. It's the ones that fit the Google values that get hired, and you know, it's what we're talking about. And you know, it's interesting. My daughter is back here now, and she's 29, you know, she's, you know, and I think her and her generation, I mean, she's talking potentially to another company at the moment from where she is. And what's very clear in her mind, and obviously partly because she's my daughter, is the ethics of the company. You know, what is its sense of purpose? You know, yes, obviously the money, the role, and everything else, but it's not the only thing now. And I think that's what people, you know, people are really looking for, because they want, as I said earlier, they want to believe in a company. They don't want it to be on the front pages of the media for bad behavior, because, you know, they and that's ultimately, you know, that I think there's the whole point of all of this is that everything we're talking about, you know, largely adds up to a company being successful over time. You know, it's and there are lots of companies that you know, grow quite rapidly, but they don't do what you've done, which is worry about who they're hiring, and then they grow quite rapidly, and then they end up with the wrong type of people, and then, you know, everything goes wrong, you know, and because they haven't built from a strong foundation. I mean, it's interesting. Funny enough, I've got a new client that I'm starting with, and they've got to a point of 50 people, and it's ironic actually, because, you know, they've got a new CEO coming in, and they've started to realize that for them to grow sustainably, they need to have a strong culture, and therefore hence I've got involved. But you know, it is interesting what you say about numbers, because you know, it's more difficult to do it to start it when you've got many more thousand people involved. You know, McLaren was quite small when I got involved. I mean, it was a big name and a big company, but it wasn't thousands of people. You know, it was, you know, a few hundred.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. I think that brings us to the end of this session. Anybody has any questions? More questions from Mark?
No questions.
Nobody has it?
No questions, but definitely this was an amazing conversation, because it was so interesting to meet like-minded people. And I think personally also I'm on a mission to drive this kind of a change, to bring in a lot of human back in whatever we're doing, whether it is human resources or anything. And it's so nice to connect with as many such people as possible. So I'm sure this book will be a great read, Mark, for everyone.
Well, I hope you get a chance to read it. I know you can't get it on Amazon at the moment, but you can get it via the publisher, Springer, or you can download it via Amazon. I mean, it's the same situation we were in the UK about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Look, I think what I've enjoyed is I mean, that's what it's lovely to hear frankly, that we've all got a common view, and you know, I'm very interested in talking more to all of you, because I you know, I think the more I can share my views, the more I can help you with your own thinking, then that's great, and I love it. You know, I'm finding it, I'm really love the whole 2 hours. I always forget that you're. It's funny. It's the first time I've ever known a time difference to be on the half hour. so and it was like when I was first doing with my first interview with Hector, she kept saying, well, I'm going to interview this time, and I kept thinking, well, that's going to be 10:30, not 10 o'clock. So that's been a little unique experience for me, is you're all on this slightly different time zone.
So it's been really interesting, and I think we all got to learn so many new things also from your ideas about whatever you have mentioned in the book. And I think everybody had some very interesting points to share also from their own experiences. So that brings us to the end of this session today. Yeah. And maybe in the future we'll have some more interactive sessions like these. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, Dr. Prashant. Thank you, Harini. Thank you, Vishal. It was wonderful having you, all of you here. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, except before you run off, you know,
I'm not running off.
No, you've got that. You've got that face on, which means I'm now finishing the interview. So I mean, if you guys are interested, there is this whole, you know, section on best-in-class leadership behaviours, which we could, you know, talk through again. I mean, you know, obviously, you know, they are all in the book, but you know, I'd be if you're interested in that, I'd be very happy to have another follow-up. Because I'm learning, you know, the thing is, I mean, what I get out of this is learning from you guys. You know, and that's what that's the joy for me is understanding. Well, it just gives me confidence, frankly, that what we're talking about is something that is really resonating, and I think that's great news. Sorry, Hector, I'll shut up now.
Oh, no. Thank you so much for being there. Yeah.
Right. And thank you, Ekta, for getting all of us together.
Yes,
Thanks a lot.
absolutely.
It was
Yeah,
my
thanks,
pleasure
Ekta.
that you all said yes. Yeah.
And I think I will thank LinkedIn, I think, because that article
yes.
of mine connected Ekta and Mark, and I think got me onto the panel. So the
Same here.
more power to LinkedIn.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, I've been having all my contacts on LinkedIn only. All the interviews that I take, everything. So
Okay.
I'm a big LinkedIn fan.
Great. Same here.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
See you. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great
Take care.
weekend also. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.